So apparently Syrian asylum seeker Hassan Al-Konta was so against the idea of being a refugee in Malaysia, he lived in KLIA2's boarding area for over 6 months, trying to get to asylum seeker haven, Canada. Unfortunately for his plans, he got arrested. His decision obviously offended a lot of Malaysians, but guys, really, he might actually have a point. A refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, or violence. This is the textbook definition given by the UNHCR, a refugee agency created by UN in 1950. And they play a big role in assisting refugees in Malaysia because, believe it or not, we do not have the legal framework to deal with refugees. We have not signed the 1951 Refugee Convention or its subsequent 1967 protocol, and they highlight, among other things, that a refugee has to be given the right to earn a living, access to education, freedom of movement, and there's a prohibition on the expulsion of a refugee where they would still face danger. And this is despite the fact that we have 160,000 refugees, one of the largest refugee populations in the region. Without a legal framework, refugees are technically branded as undocumented migrants. And as a result of that, they are left vulnerable to legal and social persecution, not given the right to education, have limited freedom of movement, and are unable to hold jobs legally. Employers do hire refugees under the counter, but without validation, they are often exploited and paid very poorly. Sometimes not even paid at all. Worst case is they get arrested while waiting to be registered and are taken to detention centers where living conditions are so bad that not just refugees, even undocumented migrants shouldn't be living there. From 2014 to 2016, 161 people died of diseases in there. Here is where UNHCR comes into play. They provide a card, an ad hoc arrangement with the government that gives refugees with the card some leeway. And this gives them some form of protection from imprisonment and detention. UNHCR has also made a deal with the government to give registered refugees a 50% discount at public hospitals.
The UNHCR card for refugees here in Malaysia is probably the single most important document that gives them any semblance of protection. Precisely because we don't have a legal framework to protect refugees in Malaysia, it's really important to have some kind of documentation that, number one, states that they are recognized as people in need of protection, whether it's asylum seeker status or refugee status. There are some employers who feel more comfortable if you have at least a UNHCR card, even if you're undocumented. Some employers are willing to hire people with UNHCR cards because they feel there's at least an institution that is responsible for you. Without the UNHCR card, the people will actually have to pay the full rate of the foreigner's rate for public health facilities. But the UNHCR card doesn't give you a legal status to stay in the country. There's no agreement with the immigration to recognize the card as a kind of a temporary stay permit.
Having a UNHCR card definitely helps, but only so much. A 50% discount at public hospitals is great, but not so much if you legally can't work to make a living. And all of this is actually hurting us. Time and resources are wasted in rounding up refugees when immigration officers could be focusing on legitimate migration crimes. Having a policy of not having a policy is ignoring the problem while hoping it goes away. Because refugees are going to come if they have to, and not having a system in place only makes it worse for everyone. Ratifying the Refugee Convention is one thing, but changes can be made at a policy level as a first step before we even get there. The easiest thing that we can do is to give refugees the chance to work legally. Not only will this help them become self-sustainable and less vulnerable, they would actually be giving back to our economy. Numerous studies and reports have shown this to work. In Michigan, US, refugees contributed $295 million to the local economy and created over 2,000 jobs. A study in Rwanda found that refugees that were given cash aid brought back returns more than the aid that was provided.
What we need here is more policy, because we have institutions and we have services actually that could deliver. The refugee population is not enormous here. We need a mix of assistance in a humanitarian sense to some families, but also really access to services, access to jobs, access to facilities and basic rights. Those are the things that really matter the most. So trying to allow refugees to access employment, for example, trying to allow refugees to access the government healthcare system. Those are the types of interventions which are much more important. So that's actually where policy comes in too.
This will help refugees that are here for a short run, but for many, that's not the case. Especially with children and teenagers in the picture, many do end up living here for a lot longer than expected.
I think for the vast majority, if conditions did really improve and they were convinced that conditions were stable enough, I think they would want to have that choice to go back. There are people though who have just totally lost faith in their countries and their country's ability to protect them. And I think that those people, the Rohingya, for example, are one group who just don't see any possibility. They still feel like they belong to that country, but they also, because they've been away so long and they've seen the developments for such a long period of time, they just don't have faith that things will change.
And the reality is that less than 1% of registered refugees are successfully repatriated to third countries. Most remain in transit nations for a long time, long enough for them to become surrogate citizens. When it comes to situations like this, integrating the population is an option. Over here, refugees make up less than 1% of the population, many of whom that are skilled and able can take up jobs that we do not want, and this can potentially work to manage the number of migrant workers that we have. UNHCR opened shop in Malaysia in 1975, when we received a wave of refugees from Vietnam. It's been 43 years since then, and we have yet to come up with a long-term framework on how to deal with refugees. But it's not too late. In 2017, the Barisan government introduced the MyRC program that had a better mechanism to control and monitor incoming refugees. The implementation, however, left something to be desired. Only 300 registered out of 160,000 refugees. But conceptually, it's a good place to start. While Pakatan promised in their manifesto to ratify the UN Convention, recent immigration clampdown on undocumented migrants, which would de facto include refugees, paints a different picture. Seeing how we treat our refugees, is it really a surprise that when given a choice, someone may actually turn down an offer to be a refugee here? Refugees literally risk their lives to get to us. The least that we can do is provide an alternative that is better than what they have been through. Hey guys, thanks for watching Newsflash. We try to dissect current topics to encourage discussion. Is there anything you'd like us to talk about? Let us know in the comments below.